Good morning, everyone, and welcome to High Quality Instructional Materials. We have some great panelists here for you today, and we are going to talk about high quality materials, the implementation, and then we get to hear from someone in Alabama, from Crenshaw County, who's actually implementing these things. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Dr. Jared Miracle. Dr. Miracle lives in Tennessee, but we forgive him for that. And we are going to hear from him. He's done a lot of great work with curriculum and high quality. And so we're excited to welcome you this morning.
Hey, good morning, Sonia. Thanks for having me. I told Sonia before we started, I hope people didn't log off if they saw my Tennessee gear in the background. So I'll ask for some grace on that for what I assume will be an audience that's mostly sympathetic to the Tigers or the Crimson Tide, but we'll all be friends. We'll all be friends today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will talk through a few things and have some time for question and answer. Like Sonia said, my name is Jared, and I'm currently consulting with a number of schools and districts on high quality materials. Most recently, I was the chief academic officer in Jackson-Madison County Schools in West Tennessee, and we underwent a pretty significant curriculum implementation process. Before that, I helped launch Instruction Partners, which is a nonprofit organization based in Nashville that consults with schools and districts across the country to implement high quality materials. And prior to that, I was a middle school and high school administrator and formerly a history teacher. And I think, that experience is critical, and I think gives us the perspective to really think about this work. Most of us, I would assume, have been that teacher in the classroom and have stood in front of a number of students who have struggled with reading. And I think that lights a fire in many of us to start to problem solve and figure out how we can help and make that situation better. So I'm not going to bury the lead here. I want to tell you kind of what we were able to do in Jackson and why I think high quality materials and reading are so important. Quite frankly, it works. And we were able to measure that on a number of fronts. A couple of the most notable data points that we collected in Jackson, we were able to double the percentage of our kindergarten students with above average phonemic awareness scores. And I've included that data there, so you can see that it was a significant percentage that were above average. And that was across multiple cohorts, not just a one-time thing. So that speaks to the power of systematic phonics instruction, which we'll talk about just a little bit. We also saw an increase in our third grade reading scores right off the bat with our implementation of knowledge building curricula. And so, that's something that takes a number of years to really see happen in a consistent way, but you can see that early success. And then another thing that we thought was very important was the increase in our teacher effectiveness scores. We have a value added system in Tennessee, and it measures, the year-on-year growth of teachers, students, and what their expected scores are. So you can see we had a pretty sizable gain in the percentage of teachers that met or exceeded those growth expectations, and this was after our third year of implementation. So the problem is we know how to teach reading, we're just not doing it. There's plenty of research around the science of reading, and I really like to refer to the simple view of reading because I think it's very easy to understand, but when you combine decoding with language comprehension, that results in reading comprehension. The question is, if we know that this is true, and we know that there are high quality materials out there available, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we using those to implement in our schools and districts to improve outcomes for students? And I think the root cause is that there's a blind spot in our profession because most district leaders, and I count myself in this, don't have a deep academic background in literacy. We're mostly trained as teachers in pedagogy. Same thing when we're administrators. And so we lean on pedagogy in our roles, both as teachers and as leaders, because we don't have this deep background in literacy and the research around literacy. There is no finishing school where you go as a principal or a district leader or a state agency leader to be trained on the research and literacy, such as the simple view of reading, the baseball study, and related studies. So commonly what happens, and I think we all see this and have seen this, that teachers end up playing the role of curriculum developer, and they don't have the time, resources, or the expertise to do that well. Most teachers are not trained to write curriculum. They're trained to implement it and teach it to their students. And so we saddle teachers with a responsibility that they often shouldn't have. And so that self-created curriculum that teachers put together misses lots of opportunities, both for vertical alignment across grades and horizontal alignment within grades. And so what I mean by that, does each lesson and unit build on itself throughout the year? And then can you draw a line between content covered in first grade and third grade? And if every teacher is responsible for creating their curriculum, that generally doesn't happen. So in my experience and what I've seen in working with districts across Tennessee and other states, there's a progression in terms of a solution that we can use to tackle the problem. And it's based around the instructional core work of Dr. Richard Elmore. And I can refer you to a couple of articles if you're not familiar with his work. But basically, he says there are three things that you have to be able to account for in order to raise student achievement. Number one, challenging content. Do we have the right knowledge in front of our students? Number two, skilled teachers. And number three, engaged students, actively engaged students. And so once you start to look at classrooms through those three things, you can't really unsee that. And what I'm suggesting is that traditionally we focus more on number two and three, but you really can't do number two or three without accounting for number one, and that's making sure the right content is in the room and in a reading classroom. That's critically important. And so because of that, because we tend to lean more towards pedagogy, I would suggest that high quality materials are the most overlooked school improvement lever that we currently have in the country right now, because they're not used as often as they should be, and they're not well implemented in many cases. As I've worked through this process in the district that I just left and in districts that I've supported in the past, I think there's really four key phases to think about as you're sort of identifying materials and thinking about next steps. First, you have to set that vision. Like, do we all have the same end goal? And I don't think you can short that phase. You really got to dig in. I refer to it as materials 101, and make sure that you're comfortable with where you're trying to get and the research that exists in that field. Then you get into your pilot and kickoff phase, aligning the program and systems in your district, and then a continuous improvement process. I don't want to spend a lot of time here. I have a detailed outline of sort of questions to think through, and knowing if you're checking all the major boxes here that I'd be happy to talk to you about later. But I mean, as you get started, I think there's a few questions you can ask yourself and make sure that you're on a good path. Do you agree on the research? I know there's been lots of conversation in Alabama recently around science of reading and what science of reading is, but number one, you have to agree on the research. Secondly, you have to define what high quality means in terms of materials. And so some basic definitions would be that it's standards aligned, it's rigorous and challenging, and that it's coherent and cumulative. And by cumulative, I mean building knowledge over a period of years that's going to support vocabulary growth and then reading comprehension. And so you're familiar, no doubt, with current resources like edreports.org and Louisiana Believes that rank curricula and outline their strengths and various weaknesses. I think once you do those things, you have to create a sense of urgency about this work and audit your current reality. And so if you've seen reports like TNTP's Opportunity Myth, you can see that on a national scale. I think you need to do that locally as well. It's something we did in Jackson. We did a 200 classroom review with the Instructional Practice Guide to audit what was happening in classrooms, and found that only about 12 to 13% were aligned to standards before we actually implemented curriculum. And so I would suggest doing something like that locally. It can give you some of that local data that means more sometimes than national studies that sometimes you might think, well, that doesn't apply to us. That's not here. outline your process, like I mentioned on the previous slide. How are you going to go about selecting, piloting, and deciding on curricula and figuring out what stands in the way? And then number 5, agreeing on an instructional framework to use in coaching and providing feedback. You have to have a common language to describe instruction in your district, and that gets really important when you get into the nuts and bolts of implementation. So what was going on in Jackson when we went through this process, the district was using an all-red program, and that's some Ed Reports language in terms of the lack of alignment that existed, and just a hodgepodge of other things. And so, as I mentioned, we went through this process of creating a sense of urgency by showing this information to our principals and using walkthrough data to really inform our next steps. And your principals have to be such a critical part of the plan in order for it to be successful. Going through those steps led us through an adoption and implementation process with core knowledge, EL, and LearnZillion. Those are the 3 that we selected for implementation. There are a number of high quality materials that you can implement and do great things with. These just happen to be the ones that we use. And then we measured the ongoing effectiveness of that with an instructional framework based on the Instructional Practice Guide from Student Achievement Partners. And if you're not familiar with that tool, again, be happy to talk to you about that because it's an excellent resource. So in the end, I think there's some must-dos to really identify and then move forward with your materials. The most often used phrase in our district was trust the process. You have to articulate your plan and stick to it. And remember that it is a process and not an event. It's not flipping a switch. You're trying to change behaviors, and doing that over time is something that takes time. Involve your stakeholders. Your teachers have to be right in the thick of this as you're planning for it to really stick and be successful. And then others in your community need to know what's happening and what's going on. As I've mentioned, implementing an instructional framework to guide and measure and provide feedback is a critical part of this. Really thinking through your professional learning cycles. What are you going to do in adoption, your launch phase, and then your ongoing phase for teachers and leaders to support them. Empowering principals to lead and not just participate in the curriculum implementation. It's easy to think that this is something that is just relegated to teachers. They're the ones that are going to teach it. But what we saw and what we found when I worked at Instruction Partners is that if the principal is not the main voice for the curriculum implementation, it falls flat. Because when the district leaves the school, the teachers are going to look to the principals to signal what's really important and what should be done. And so the principals have to play a foremost role in this for it to be successful. They're going to need to support teachers in new planning processes. Planning with high quality materials looks dramatically different than it does when you're creating curriculum. And so this element of lesson study and internalizing content so that you can deliver it effectively is a critical process. And then that last one for district leaders, I think, is one of your most important jobs. How do we get everything out of the way that's not supporting our curriculum implementation? Are there anything that we're asking as a district that is conflicting what the materials are asking teachers to do? And so planning through that, thinking through all the things that might be in the way is really important as you kick off those initial phases of implementation with materials. So with that, I mean, my contact information is on the screen, and I can send this to Sonia and she can share it afterwards in case others want to be in touch or ask follow-up questions. But at that point, I think we're going to have some Q&A just based on some of the things that I've shared before we move forward.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions in the chat box. First was, could we get a copy of your walkthrough tool aligned to the instructional core?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. How did you structure the instructional review process using the instructional practice guide?
Yeah, so we went through a long process of norming our principles on this. We started with watching just some video clips, and the instructional practice guides are broken down to 3 core actions, and it basically asks do you have the right content in the room? So do you have a high quality text that's driving the lesson? Number two, are the tasks related to that text aligned to standards? So are they evidence-based? Are they focused on the right vocabulary? And then the third one is, are students engaging both with the teacher and with each other? And so we started just with a norming process with some video clips to identify whether or not those things were happening. And then I led our principals on a probably a 6 month process of norming, where we would go in and out of schools doing this live. So we'd go visit a classroom for 10 or 15 minutes and give feedback or what we thought the feedback would be based on that document. And so it's just an ongoing process that became part of our monthly check-ins as we coached principals on being able to walk in classrooms and pick out what the highest leverage feedback would be around the curriculum that was being implemented. So yeah, that's generally what that process looked like.
Great. And I think you've already answered this. Can we by chance get a PDF of your presentation today?
Yes, I will send it to you as soon as we conclude.
All right. I think that is all. Thank you. That's great information, especially where we are here in Alabama with high quality, comprehensive core instructional materials coming up. And so if you have more questions, you're welcome to type them in, everyone, and we can ask those at the end. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Kimyana Burke. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimyana Burke, and I am the Early Literacy Policy Director for Foundation for Excellence in Education. Currently, I work directly with about 16 states to ensure that they are being supported as they implement their third grade promotion policy. And I will share my screen now. So Excel in Ed is a 501c3 organization that focuses on educational opportunity, innovation, and quality. And our goal is to increase student learning, advance equity, and ready our graduates for college and career. Formerly, I was the state literacy director for the Mississippi Department of Education, where I led the implementation of the Literacy-Based Promotion Act from 2013 until just recently, 2019. And most recently, I was the executive director for the Office of Teaching and Learning in the Jackson Public School District, where we were tasked with implementing a high quality curriculum. So the most recent forces behind our reading policy momentum is, first, a grassroots movement by our parents for decoding dyslexia. That aims to raise dyslexia awareness and also empower our families to support their children to ensure that their students receive the accommodations that they need and also the remediation that they need to be better readers. And then also national attention around the science of reading. Emily Hanford has been a champion for the science of reading and getting that knowledge out to the world, most notably hard words and also at a loss for words, where we were able to learn a lot more about how these issues or challenges in being able to teach reading, or also embracing the science of reading in different communities and different schools. We were able to really look closely at how that was taking place across the country in our communities. And then most recently, strengthening reading instruction dataverse. It provides a list of how our colleges of education are preparing our future teachers to be ready to teach reading in the classroom. This is just a snapshot of the current K-3 reading policies by state. There are states that have comprehensive early literacy policies where they also include the retention piece at the end of 3rd grade, in addition to the other principles such as screeners and diagnostic assessments and parental supports to ensure that ExcelinAid is able to provide that. Now, I'll talk specifically about the Alabama Literacy Act. And the Alabama Literacy Act with high quality instructional materials implementation, this act is really one of the most comprehensive literacy acts to date. And so I'm very excited about this act being passed last year. And now let's just speak a little bit about some of the key components that I believe are just really vital to implementation. The first piece, as Jared mentioned earlier, is the adoption of your high quality instructional materials. And I want to take a moment to talk about this. The differences in use and support could influence a given textbook's efficacy. So it's not just that we are going to look at this list and adopt high quality instructional materials. We have to make sure that we are using these materials as intended. All right, so it's not really a step, but all of these other components are key and they really do work together. So it's not like they work in succession, they kind of work simultaneously. Professional development, which should be initial and ongoing. Your instruction, including and supported by the coaching support, analysis of your data, and then also the refinement of your instruction. So I know that I have a lot of words on these slides, and we were all taught to not have so many words on your slides, but at the conclusion of this session, I will send this presentation to Sonia, and I always want to make sure that attendees have a copy of the PowerPoint and they're able to make sense of it, even if I'm not there to present it. So just understand that the words are for you to make sure that you understood my thinking in this. So the first piece, identify and provide relevant and aligned professional development that will increase teachers' knowledge and strengthen instructional delivery. The PD has to be relevant. It has to be aligned to your state standards. And also it has to focus on ways in which teachers can build their knowledge and also strengthen their pedagogy. The first step of that is really filling the knowledge gap for the science of reading. And that can be in collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, with your colleges of education for our pre-service teachers and also for our in-service teachers. And I know that Alabama right now is going through some pilots with letters training. Mississippi also implemented letters training statewide for all of our kindergarten through 4th grade teachers, our elementary administrators, and also our K-8 special education teachers. And most recently, we involved a cohort of reading professors from our colleges of education to also attend letters training. The next one is to, when you train your teachers in your core curriculum, be intentional and transparent about the new shifts in practice. Now, I have trained your teachers, your reading coaches, specialists, and your administrators. The administrators will be responsible for ensuring fidelity and for observing and also providing feedback, not just your coaches and specialists. So our administrators need to make sure that they are also aware of the core curriculum and all of the moving parts of it. The transparency about the new shifts in practice include opportunities where teachers will be serving more as a facilitator, and it won't be teacher-centered, it'll be more student-centered. And that's going to be challenging for some teachers who may be accustomed to standing in the front of the classroom and just delivering content. So there are going to be shifts in practice, and our teachers have to be prepared for that. And now more than ever, become familiar with the supplemental online resources. very simple to just say, as a vendor, we've put our textbook online, or we put our curriculum online. But what does that mean? Does it differ online as it is in person now that we've moved into distance learning? Are there opportunities for students to be more engaged when the information is presented online than it is when there will be a teacher standing in front of the student and delivering this information? Also provide training on different types and purposes of assessments, including the built-in assessments that may accompany the core curriculum. Sometimes the format looks a lot differently than the state test, and teachers are thinking, why do I keep spending my time assessing our students with this type of test when it doesn't mirror the state test? But understand that those assessments that accompany the core curriculum are by design, and make sure that you are administering those assessments to students. And we'll talk a little bit more about assessments in a few slides. And lastly, the training on distance learning platforms. This was a challenge. Closing school, the pandemic was a real challenge for some families. It was also a challenge for some educators. So allow opportunities for our students to engage in distance learning throughout the school year. Give them opportunities to submit assignments via Google Classroom, or give them time to use specific other platforms so that they can become familiar in case your school district has to move to a hybrid model when school opens, or even completely virtual. Okay, so instruction and coaching support, and I paired those together, of course, for a reason. The classroom is where the magic happens. So during your instructional delivery of your high quality materials, make the shift. And to make this shift, you have to establish routines, even for your students. This is going to be different. Opportunities where they have to partner or they have to work in groups to solve problems. Students have to be familiar with these types of routines in order for the lesson to be effective. And so also including teacher as the facilitator of learning. As a teacher, prepare for your lesson. I think Jared mentioned something about internalizing the lesson. So prepare for the lesson, gather resources, the text that you may need, any manipulatives, those types of things to be prepared to deliver the lesson to students. And if this is your first time delivering these types of lessons that may be a shift for you, practice the delivery with a colleague or your coach. Think about the lesson sequence and don't leave pieces of the lesson out. You know, I've observed instances where the lesson sequence calls for, you know, a time to stop and for the students to discuss those types of things that teachers feel that, you know, my time is running out, so I can skip this part. That won't be effective when you think about the student's mastery of that specific content or skill. And of course, the reading instruction should be delivered explicitly and systematically. Now with coaching support, I'll talk a little bit just about the first bullet and also the last one. Calibrate expectations with the school administrator. I don't think we talk about this enough. I've spoken with a lot of coaches and administrators, and you want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. With our coaches, they want to have that type of trusting relationship with teachers. A lot of times, if the coach comes in the room with the administrator, the teachers begin to look as if, okay, well, they're in here together. But that's a part of the calibration process. And a part of the coach and the administrator then meeting afterwards to discuss what they saw, to discuss ways in which each of them thinks that the teacher can get better in his or her instruction, or some commendations that they may have. So calibrate your expectations with your school administrator. And then lastly, the differentiated support. As a coach, if you begin to provide every teacher or each teacher in the building the same amount of support, you will be the jack of all trades, the master of none. I actually love that saying because sometimes we can really spread ourselves too thin. So differentiate your support to teachers according to where they are on the developmental curriculum or continuum. You will find that there are teachers who, from the training, they are ready to go. And then there are some teachers from, once they come back from training, they're really trying to figure out where to begin. So as you support them in that transfer from theory to practice, you can do that, of course, through all of the coaching techniques and especially through job-embedded professional development. Next, I'm sorry, I went the opposite way. Okay, so let's look at data analysis and the requirements that are specifically in the Alabama Literacy Act. The three types of assessments that are mentioned are the screener, the diagnostic assessment, and the formative assessments. Now, I've seen several bills this year that mention diagnostic assessment and screener kind of interchangeably. But let's talk a little bit about the difference between the two. The screener will identify students at risk of reading difficulties. All of your students should be screened at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and also the end of the year to look for growth or regression. So it really separates those students who may be at risk versus those who are not. And as we know, there are also dyslexia screeners that will identify students that may have dyslexia characteristics. Okay, now that we've screened and we've identified our students who may be at risk, then for those students, we will administer a diagnostic assessment. With the diagnostic assessment, you will find the lowest deficit skill, and also it will determine or pinpoint where you should begin with the interventions. And of course, you will progress monitor those specific skills. The lowest deficit skill, you will continue to progress monitor until those challenges are remedied. And when you think about the formative assessment, remember, the formative assessment is after the teaching has been done, and throughout, you're going to determine the effectiveness of your instruction, the misconceptions that your students may have about what you've taught, and then also be able to identify students during that time period that are below, on, or even above grade level as it relates to your grade level standards. So you're going to do the formative assessments throughout your teaching to ensure that what you're saying is actually what students are hearing and that they're able to master the content. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about instruction refinement or reflection. It's also known as an inquiry cycle. So I saw this quote, and this is from the book, The Differentiated Approach to the Common Core. And I know in Mississippi, we can't say Common Core. Not sure if you can say it in Alabama. What approach to tomorrow's lesson will help me best serve each of my students? So think about what the data revealed. Recall the targets of the formative assessment. What were you hoping to learn from that data? Determine patterns in student responses, and then also decide what comes next. So definitely you will do this with your coach. You may also do this with your administrator and other colleagues if you are fortunate enough to work with a team. And as you're doing your data review, make sure that you reflect on ways in which what you taught may have not gone across very well with your students, and your data will show you that. That part ends it for me. My information is here, my email address is here, and as I stated earlier, I will share this with Sonia so that she can send it out to all of you. And at this time, Sonia, if there are any questions, I will entertain those at this time.
Yes, ma'am. What are the lessons you learned in Mississippi in terms of implementation that we can learn from?
Well, our superintendent, Dr. Wright, is amazing. I think everyone in the country kind of knows that now. But one thing that we realized is that there were components of our law that did not have the structures in place within our Department of Education to even support those. So whereas our law spoke to intensive interventions, and so does Alabama, at the time that we started implementing this law in 2013, we didn't have an Office of Intervention Services. In 2015, that structure became live at our department. There were so many questions about what does it mean? What is an intensive intervention? We're following the multi-tiered system of supports. Are we still just doing RTI? What does it really mean? And so once that office was established, then we were able to provide the specific support. So I'll say this, look at the components of your law and just ensure at the state level, or when you partner with districts at the district level, that there are supports for teachers to be able to communicate what their roles and responsibilities are and what the expected outcomes are. And we learned a lot in Mississippi for that. We even formed an Office of Early Childhood.
Great, thank you. We have another one. Knowing that some actions are more powerful than others, what do you think are high leverage actions that we can start with?
High leverage actions, first will be the professional development on the science of reading. A lot of people initially, when we started saying that we want everyone trained in letters, we had districts that said, we have our own curriculum. We're not switching curricula, but letters is not a curriculum. Letters is a training to build teachers' knowledge about the science of reading. And once you understand scope and sequence, once you understand what's needed, then you apply what you learn to any curriculum that you choose. So I believe the first high leverage item would be to ensure that everyone is aware of what the science of reading is and how students learn best. Also with the assessments, being able to screen students, because we can't go in blind. And I'll just say this one thing, and I know that this wasn't a part of the question, but I know that we look a lot, we're thinking a lot about how we don't have end of year data for our students who will be transitioning to the upcoming grade. But we may have mid-year data. That data can be used to begin determining where students are going to be day one of school, if students are going to receive interventions, if students are going to be in tutoring before or after school. We have some data now where we can identify students. So I just urge you all not to wait for screening, do it within the first 30 days. I urge you to look at your data now, identify where your students are, and begin providing those supports on day one, because we do know that there is a couple with the summer learning loss, we have the COVID-19 loss. So we do have opportunities there to fill those gaps.
Great, thank you. One more,
Okay.
actually 2 more. Compared to other states, what are things that Alabama can consider for next steps?
All right. I believe in your law, you have your reading specialists that will be deployed to your lowest performing schools. And I saw that, and that's very similar to the role that Mississippi took with that. I know at one point there were coaches in all of your schools or at many of your schools, but one thing that I would urge is that there are opportunities for your reading specialists to come together, and that they are not working in isolation. Opportunities for them to come together and to receive that type of professional development, so that they themselves can continue to get that type of knowledge and refine their tools and add to their toolbox so that they can better support teachers. Also, with the retention piece of the law, just as in Mississippi, I just urge you guys to be transparent. I urge you to work closely with your parents and make them your partners. This is not going to be an easy lift. One thing that we did in Mississippi was that we called it a tour, where we went around to 8 areas of the state, and we talked to parents, and we really outlined what the law was and what the expectations were and how parents can help us. So as we look forward, it's not going to be just what we do in the schools. It's also going to be the support that we receive from our parents and our other stakeholders in the community in order to make any of this work.
That's great information. And the last one is, I know that Mississippi has the Certified Academic Language Therapist. And what part do they play? And the next question to that is, do they pay stipends there?
Well, I am not able to answer that question. As far as our certified, our language therapists, they fall under the Office of Intervention Services. Our schools that were fortunate enough to have our certified, the language therapists in those schools, they were not a part of our Literacy-Based Promotion Act support. Our literacy coaches were. And also with our Office of Special Education, they made coaching a part of their state systemic improvement plan. So we also had coaches that may be working side by side in our literacy support schools where our literacy coaches were. But the role that our language therapists play were not a part of our Literacy-Based Promotion Act intentional supports. And I'm not sure to answer that question. They were just not under my office at the time.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for the wonderful information, and we look forward to getting your PowerPoint on this.
Thank you.
So our last panelist today is Kayla Benock. I think I said that correctly. Kayla is actually from Crenshaw County Schools and Crenshaw County in Alabama. And if you're like me, I had to look it up on a map to discover where it was. But Kayla is an ARI reading specialist there, and she's going to share with us some things that they have put in place with teacher training and high quality materials, and how that's going in Crenshaw County. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Sonia. And thank you, Dr. Burke and Dr. Miracle. I don't know how on earth I'm going to follow you two, so maybe I should have gone first and we should have flipped it. But great information, and I was sitting here taking notes of you're jogging my mind of things that I want to do next. So thank you so much. Like Sonia said, my name is Kayla Benock. You did say it right. I'm so excited to share with you all how we're working to integrating curriculum, teacher knowledge, and then just really choosing the right materials. In Crenshaw County, we're very far from perfect. We have a lot of room to grow, but I believe we're making strides in the right direction, coupling all of these things together and trying to meet the needs of our students in Crenshaw. So yes, Sonia said it's very small. We have one red light. We're very rural, so we do the best with what we have. But thank you all so much for joining in. The main things I really want to share with all of you is the impact of choosing the right curriculum or choosing the curriculum that's right for you. There's not a perfect one. And coupling that really with teacher knowledge and then the supplemental tools to help us for student growth and teacher growth as well. So, and thinking about going forward with this, just keeping in mind the goal of the Literacy Act. This is something that myself as a reading specialist and a coach, I try to keep on the forefront of the conversation with our teachers. The goal is for our students to leave third grade proficient and to really leave each grade proficient in where they need to be. And this quote just comes straight from the Literacy Act, but it kind of grounds me and keeps me focused on what I need to focus on and the important things. And I always like to start with this when we're talking about making the right instructional decisions. So I'm going to begin sharing a little bit about the curriculum that we use. It's hard to share our journey without telling you what we use core knowledge language arts in Crenshaw County. And you can see here on the screen, we use the first edition and kind of when and how we began that. Like I said, it's not perfect. We have to supplement, and there's things that we have to put in place to fill the gaps and to meet the lowest deficit skill for our students still. But it's hard to share our journey without sharing this. So we started with kindergarten in 2016 and 2017, and then first through fifth picked up that following year. So I share that to say that this 2019-2020 school year's students have had that curriculum since kindergarten, keeping in mind that they're kindergarten and first grade teachers. That was their first time. Those were both implementation years. And then at middle of the year, according to Scantron Performance Series, our third graders, we had 72% that were on or above grade level. Still a lot of room for growth, but definitely showing progress in the right direction for us and that's what we're looking for, just moving in the right direction. So choosing a curriculum for us, we had to look at, I have to think about why was it right for us, and the other two, Dr. Burke and Dr. Miracle, have talked about the knowledge gap and filling that gap for our students. And this is what really helped to guide us. It took a lot of convincing and a lot of teacher buy-in because it's so different than anything that we've ever used before. So when you look at the why, that it helps to build a deep vocabulary, and it helped us to make that choice. It seemed like a no-brainer. With the focus on building background and the emphasis on foundational skills, and really filling that knowledge gap through the approach of teaching history, art, and science that so many of our students just do not have that background on, especially in areas like we have in Crenshaw County. So this, like I said, this is just how we came to our decision. As far as that goes, and then how CKLA, the scope and sequence with the decoding and the other foundational skills, and then the decodable text, which Dr. Miracle talked about, the simple view of reading, and that's just, like he said, it's just simple, and it helps us to stay grounded in those foundational skills and the early literacy skills that we are so desperately lacking, and where we always see a deficit. And I know I was looking at the participants and several other friends in Alabama that are listening. We've had conversations about that for us in our state, just the phonological deficit and those early literacy skills that we're lacking here in Alabama, and our students are. So that connects me. Now you have a little bit of background about us choosing our curriculum, kind of connects me to the teacher knowledge, and that is what's really just so important for us, and for me, even as a coach, my knowledge to help guide the teachers and using that simple view of reading and connecting it. So in our system currently, I support 32 teachers, and in our system, over 50% were involved in letters this past year for the 2019-2020 school year. And then we had one school that had 92% of teachers involved in letters. So we've really been able to see growth just this past year with growing our teacher knowledge and knowing how to choose the pieces of our curriculum, and just really knowing the importance of why the curriculum is laid out like it is. And I think that goes with any curriculum that you use or you have, just having that knowledge to know what the pieces mean and why they are so important. So it's our hope as we move forward to 2020, 2021, that all of our teachers are involved in letters and can begin building their knowledge in the science of reading that is so desperately needed for the benefit of their students. So just tying it all together for us. I've shared a little bit about the curriculum that we use, and then tying that teacher knowledge. But like I said, no curriculum is perfect. Definitely have to supplement and use our knowledge and support for me as a coach. So these are some of the supports that we have in place. Obviously, the letters knowledge, and even those that are not in letters, these are other pieces that we use to support our teachers. The Intensive Phonological Awareness Program by Melanie Shuley, and then David Kilpatrick's work. That has been really a critical key for us. Administering the PAST assessment, the Phonological Awareness Screening Test, has been eye-opening for our teachers and realizing the deficit in phonological awareness that our students have. And then many of our teachers last year that saw such huge growth in their classrooms started using the Hegarty phonemic awareness lessons, whole group. And like I said, it's really opened some eyes to the deficit that we have in those phonological skills and those foundational and early literacy skills. And then another supplement, I guess you could say, that we've used that has really helped us to grow our teacher knowledge is the tools for reading. So Dr. Mary Dahlgren has come to Crenshaw County, 5 times this past year, just to do some on-site professional learning and on-site coaching. And having her there, one of my favorite things that she says is our students are the linguists. And if we watch them and if we are in tune with their mouth and the errors that they're making in their spelling and their speech, they'll teach us what we need to be teaching them. And so she has been just really instrumental in helping us to grow this past year. And also, I put the reading rope on here, and I'm going to talk about it a little more on the next slide, Scarborough's reading rope. But as far as a teacher tool, I'm really working with our teachers to use this as a tool to help pinpoint areas of weaknesses for their students, and even areas of weaknesses as far as their comfort level for themselves as a teacher. It's really helped me as I look at all those strands of the rope and knowing that they all work together for skilled reading. I see areas that I'm not as comfortable with as a specialist, and I know I can grow in. So I think it's been helpful for us to have something. I love an anchor to look back at and something that keeps us focused and grounded, and it's based on the science of reading. So we've really been using all of these pieces together to support teachers, and then so they have the tools in place to supplement curriculum and with their teacher knowledge. And then for me, I have to share my coaching tools, and it kind of ties with Dr. Burke was talking about, and having that common language throughout your district and throughout your system. So using the Diane Sweeney student-centered coaching, and then the coaching moves. And I know most of you that are probably listening is what you use as well. And if not, it's really helped me as a coach to keep those conversations data-driven and centered on the student need. And then I also have some duplicate pieces on here from the teachers, but using that PAST assessment and David Kilpatrick's work, the essentials of assessing and preventing and overcoming reading difficulties, Louisa Moach speech to print. These are the texts and the books that I'm on vacation this week, and I packed them in my suitcase in case I needed to flip back through or reread or go back and refresh my knowledge, just because they're that important to me, and it helps me to support my teachers through that student-centered coaching. The next thing is the knowledge gap, and I know Sonia has read this and done some or tried to get a training going for this with Natalie Wexler, and we hope we can get that back together. But with the knowledge gap and just firming up that background knowledge and giving those students something to build on with their knowledge. So I also included Scarborough's rope on this page. Really, for me as a coach, I keep this in my little notebook that I take from school to school, and I look at it pretty much in every classroom, and it helps me to help my teachers and pinpoint those areas of weaknesses for their students. And I just think, like I said, it's an anchor for me, and it keeps me grounded in knowing how I need to support them. So I'm going to share some personal data from our system. Like I said, we're not perfect. This is our Scantron Performance Series data from the middle of the year, since we didn't get an end of the year data. But our kindergarten, you can just see our K through 3, and this is our percentage of students that were on or above grade level middle of the year. And so I think, like I said, we have a lot of room to grow, but looking at this in comparison to our trends in the years past, it really excites me that we're moving in the right direction. And I really attribute that to all of those components: teacher knowledge, the curriculum, and then knowing how to use those pieces that we're given. So like I said, we have lots of room to grow. So our biggest components are using and choosing what we need from our curriculum and knowing the importance. We have a lot of room to grow, particularly in kindergarten, and understanding why those foundational skills are so critical for our students, and then implementing and utilizing our multisensory strategies is just something that looks different classroom to classroom, and it's a target for me as a coach to help and make sure that we are implementing those strategies. So, in just a little more data. So it really does work. I really believe that combining the right tools, the right knowledge, like Dr. Burke said, letters is not a curriculum, and we just knowing that that's ongoing learning of the science of reading. And when I say ongoing, I mean, you know, we never stop looking back to our letters books, and we never stop talking about it. So this is some data from I disaggregated from teachers that were involved in letters. So that column on the left is teachers that were simply participants in letters. So we have 6 teachers that were participants in letters, and they, in middle of the year, 52% of their students were on or above grade level. And that's kindergarten. That top column, or that top row, is kindergarten. And then that second row is first grade. So, and I really want to stop here because I feel like we're getting it right in first and second grade. And so I'm going to stop here a little bit longer just to talk about this data. We had, out of our group of teachers, second grade teachers, 2 teachers were simply just participants in letters. They did the online modules alone. They participated in the face-to-face sessions. So of that group, those 2 teachers, 67% of their students were on or above grade level. But look over to the right of that, that this is our first grade row still, and you'll see that 86%. So we have 4 first grade teachers that participated in letters, received quite a bit of coaching support for myself, and also voluntarily had a PLC. So we met as a professional learning community twice a week to do our letter sessions together, to talk about our student data, to look at any screeners that they might have been given, to look at their pass scores, all of those things. Just a true professional learning community twice a week for about an hour. So they're putting in 2 extra hours a week. And middle of the year, their average of students on or above grade level was 86%. So I think, like I said, it works is all I know what to say after that is it works. And then our next row is our second grade data, excuse me. So I have the little dots there. That's just representing that our second grade teachers involved in letters, nobody was just simply participating. The 3 second grade teachers in letters this year were in letters, received a lot of coaching support from me, open to coaching, and then we're also involved in that professional learning community, given an extra 2 hours after school every week to look at data, to talk about it, to figure out how they can better meet the needs of their students. And those 3 teachers had an average of 94% students on or above grade level. So like I said, I wanted to stop and on that right-hand column, the letters plus coaching plus professional learning community, because that's the direction that we're trying to move. We're not all there yet, but we're making gains in the right direction. And so it really does work. And it really does when your teachers are on board, when you have administrative support and they're putting in that time, and when they see that growth of their students, that's what they need. That's the fire that they need, because they get so excited because they finally feel like with that knowledge that they're able to diagnose those needs and or diagnose those deficits and really just prescribe what their students need. That bottom row is our third, and it represents our 3rd grade teachers. So, and that's our middle of the year with those that were involved in letters. So, like I said, it's a winning combination when you're tying all of these things together with your curriculum, teacher knowledge, the student-centered coaching, having that administrative support. Our superintendent is wonderful and really is behind all of this, and then using the right tools, knowing what it is that they need and how to get the right tools in their hands. So if there's any questions, I think Sonia will help to facilitate those, and please feel free to reach out to me via email. I would love feedback and to hear all of your thoughts and ideas as well.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. That was wonderful, and that data looked fabulous.
Well,
So
we're working on it.
So 2 questions so far. What has been your approach with the skills strand and the structures for small group versus whole group in like the 90-minute block?
Okay, skills. So this is a question kind of about CKLA. So CKLA, the curriculum that we use, it does require a lot of time. And so with the skills strand, a lot of it seems to be structured. CKLA doesn't necessarily say do this whole group, do this small group. So that's where we've had a lot of room to grow with teacher knowledge and knowing what do my students need whole group, what do my students need small group. And it really goes back to that planning and knowing your students. And that's why those diagnostic assessments are so critical for us and using our time the most effectively. Did that answer that okay? I think that's kind of what that question was asking.
Yes, he said
Okay.
he loved the response.
Okay.
Another question. From the standpoint of the language standards, have there been challenges associated with instruction targeting those standards during your implementation?
Absolutely not. I think with our implementation, the language, that's what's been so powerful. And I think looking at the curriculum and seeing it's there. I think maybe Dr. Miracle said this earlier, helping teachers know what to teach, because those are things that are sometimes skimmed over, or we don't see the value. So I think it's there. It's just knowing what to teach.
I think that's all the questions. That's all that are over in the chat box. Let me check the Q&A. I think that's all that I see right now. Dr. Miracle, Dr. Burke, do you have anything to follow up?
I was just going to say one thing about the language standards question. I think that's where that lesson study process and teacher collaboration gets really important. teachers sitting shoulder to shoulder, digging through the lessons, highlighting specific things. I just can't overstate the process, how important that process is. So developing like an internalization guide of questions that are really important for teachers to sit and consider before they teach a lesson, I think is just a real cornerstone of effective implementation. So, and they may be hard to see at first, but after digging through, they sort of get into some routines and they can pick out those language standards easier and how to emphasize those, particularly through writing opportunities once you get to a point where students are constructing their own writing. So just wanted to add that in.
And I'll just add about the scheduling. The master schedule is key. And, you know, many times we think of, you know, adopting high quality curricula, and then also it comes with certain suggestions for best practices for the time, whether it is an uninterrupted 90-minute reading block or uninterrupted 120 minutes. And so this is where our administrators really play a very important role in ensuring that the time is there in order to implement these best practices.
Great, thank you. Another question, does CKLA have a reading series that comes with it? My county uses Wonders, and I didn't know how it related in comparison with CKLA.
Yes, CKLA has decodable text that comes with it, as well as a read aloud component.
Dr. Mark, I know that you guys have implemented that also. Do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, Core Knowledge is a comprehensive reading curriculum that starts in pre-K. It can carry you all the way through upper elementary. One thing to point out, in the early grades and the primary grades, it's split into two strands, which I think was talked about, skill strand and the knowledge building strand, which is read aloud. But then in third grade, that transitions over to more, it's a blended strand at that point. And I mean, I don't want to say it looks like what you would consider a traditional reading curriculum to apply, because it doesn't. But it is a comprehensive curriculum at that point, so you don't have to pair it with anything else. One other thing I'll mention about the foundational skills strand is that there are decodable texts, but one thing that's unique about Core Knowledge's skill readers in the primary grades is that they're decodable, but they're also match the appropriate Lexile bands for the grades. So you're not sacrificing, it's interesting because you're not sacrificing text complexity, even though it's decodable, because of the unique way that they construct those skills readers. So it's decodable, but it's also complex appropriately for that point in the grade level.
Great, any more questions? Please feel free to type them in. Getting some comments of wonderful session, and I've gotten texts the whole entire time telling how wonderful this has been and how much everyone has enjoyed it. And then I've gotten texts from people who forgot or got called into other meetings, and so I'm glad that we are recording this. Now, just want to make sure that everybody understands, no one on this call works for any curriculum company. We're not promoting anything. We're talking about high quality curriculum. It is part of our Literacy Act, and how implementing that along with teacher training can impact student achievement. And I think that they've made a very strong case today that we need to keep learning about it and keep researching. But if no one else has anything, thank you so much. Dr. Burke, Kayla, Dr. Miracle, so much for joining, and I've talked to them numerous times, and I learn something new every single time I hear from them and talk to them, and we appreciate your support for Alabama. And even though I did see some orange behind one of the speakers, we didn't block his camera. So that's an ongoing joke. But anyway, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you, Best Practice, for sharing this, allowing us to share this with everybody. It's being recorded, and we will send it out to everyone. All right, everybody have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.